Welcome to the Blue Leadership Podcast, hosted by Dennis Nayor, a retired multi-agency police chief from the state of New York. Blue Leadership is a podcast by law enforcement for today's law enforcement leaders, taking you inside the experiences and careers of public safety experts from across the country.
Well, great to be back here, episode 37, and today's guest is Captain Jolie Macias from the Newark, California Police Department. Captain Macias has over 20 years in law enforcement. She's been a team leader and commander for her agency's SWAT team, leads the use of force training for her department, has a lot to do with peer support, has done a lot with crowd management, graduate of the Command College, and also the Law Enforcement and Public Safety Leadership Master's Degree Program at the University of San Diego. Lots more I could say, but with that, Captain Macias, thank you for being here.
Thank you so much, Dennis. I'm happy to be here.
Well, I'm going to ask the first question. Your role as commander of your SWAT team, can you just talk a little bit about that, about what that role entailed and what drew you specifically to that particular job type?
Yeah, absolutely. I think I have to go back to the beginning of my police career to kind of lay that foundation. I started as a police officer for the city of Newark in 2004. As soon as I was eligible and off of probation, I had the opportunity to try out for the SWAT team, and I was fortunate enough to make the team on my first attempt. And I had many experiences as an operator from between 2006 through 2013. After that, I became, when I promoted to sergeant, I became one of two team leaders, and I had incredible experiences as a team leader. And then I promoted to lieutenant in 2017, and at that time, there was an opportunity for me to take on the role as the tactical commander of the team. It was just natural. All my operational team leader experiences, it just made sense for me to step up and take on that role.
And what drove you or drew you into that particular facet of law enforcement? Because law enforcement, as we all know, people can go into the investigative route. They can go into just pursuing supervisory roles or admin. So what is it that specifically drew you to that tactical component?
Yeah, absolutely. Great question. So from the beginning, my decision to become a SWAT operator was all about my ability to get more training and to be safe on the street. I knew that as a patrol person, a patrol officer, I was going to be most likely working patrol 90% of my time, if not more, and possibly working in a SWAT capacity, 5 to 10% of the time, potentially. And so I knew all that additional training received. The SWAT team trains twice a month, whereas everyone else in the department does quite a bit of training. They train nearly monthly, shy for 2 months because of holidays and major city events. But that additional 2 days a month training, I knew it was going to keep me safer. I'm also a very athletic, physically active person. So it just, and a team sport person. So those types of things were a perfect fit for my personality, kind of my personal drive, and me just knowing that it was going to help me in the long run be safer during that 90% of the time on the street.
Captain, one thing that I think is important for the listeners and viewers to know is there's certain agencies that are very large agencies, state agencies, LAPD, things like that. They may have full-time dedicated SWAT teams and operators that's their sole assignment. But a lot of agencies, that isn't possible. So I'm going to ask you, and I'm guessing your SWAT team, all the members of that, even though they're at an elite level of how they train, they also have other roles. Is that correct?
Oh, 100% correct. All of our team is a collateral team, and that is the case for much of the SF Bay Area region. Here in Alameda County, there are no full-time SWAT teams. The sheriff's office does not have a full-time SWAT team. Not even Oakland Police Department has a full-time SWAT team. So we have to have really good relationships with each other to support each other, and that's why we have a very strong kinship and tight-knit tactical community here. We have to often work together and support each other. Additionally, like you mentioned, you never know who's going to show up on a call. It could be, a team with quite a few SWAT team members responding to a patrol call. And it's also important to make note that the patrol sergeant, who may or may not have tactical experience, often relies upon those tactical operators on the team to help run incidents that might just be edging into that potential SWAT call out realm. And so, yeah, unfortunately, just a collateral team, but just as good training.
Yeah, and for the listeners and viewers, we were talking offline about just how important that is, that when an officer is responding to a disturbance call, the people who called who are getting an officer that could very likely be a highly trained tactical operator who's handling a basic call for service. And that's going to have tremendous value in de-escalation, in making sure that, everything is done in a way that safety is a priority, and the tactics employed are very instrumental in the success of it. So I think that's really important to know. And as from an administrative point of view, one of the reasons I was always able to support the value of a tactical team is because I knew that they would bring that type of training and expertise to every type of call for service, and that's invaluable.
I think I will just add, Dennis, not just the training and expertise, but knowing the resources and the tools and equipment that they have access to and trained on, that not all of the rest of the patrol staff has access to. So, for example, a use of an interior robot to go attempt to make a clear, or possibly the use of a flashbang if necessary. All those tools that they have at the ready, and then additionally knowing the allied agencies, and because sometimes they have tools that we don't, ensuring that you have a familiarity with your own tools, and then the agencies around you, and having team members that have that training is completely invaluable for the safety of our community as a whole.
Without a doubt. I'm glad that we didn't miss covering that component, because that's key, because I think a lot of the people watching who have tactical teams will be part of teams that are part-time and will have very similar operating methodology. So I'm really glad we remembered to get that into the mix.
Awesome.
And what did you do to set yourself up? Were there specific trainings that you went to before you got onto your department SWAT team?
Honestly, no. I attended training of the team prior to being a member of the team, just so I could have a firm understanding of what they were doing. I wasn't familiar with team tactics. I wasn't familiar with building clearing, just the very basic firearms type experience from my academy. I'm not like a gun person. I don't go hunting, or I don't have those types of foundational skills prior to working in law enforcement. But I was training for triathlons. I was a rock climber, just very active, and knew that I had this athleticism and physical ability that I was confident that I was going to be able to pass the physical component. I had to definitely do a little bit more personal work toward being proficient with firearms.
Yeah, one of the things that this podcast will have a strong reach and value toward is a lot of women in law enforcement, especially as we look at the 30 by 30 initiative, which is to have 30% of the policing workforce be female by the year 2030. And if you look at the statistics of the amount of women that are in supervisory ranks is much less than their male counterparts. And this podcast is going to have a lot of value in just breaking that glass ceiling of showing that women can also do an amazing job in a tactical team component. And was that hard for you to shatter that myth that was really mostly a male-dominated role, that for you to be able to not only be on your tactical team, but leading the team?
I've had this question many, many times, and honestly, I have to give a lot of accolades to the department that I work for and the city that I work for, because from the start, I never felt inequities as a woman coming into any type of role. We have a very fair testing process. In 2004, I was the first woman to make it onto the team, but they saw very quickly that because I was outperforming many of the men on the team, that it just shattered the. I just proved myself very quickly on my personal physical abilities, and then my commitment to ensuring that I was proficient in the movements, tactics, firearms, et cetera. So I was able to gain that credibility very quick, but I know that it had a lot to do with the very inclusive culture that is already here at the department that I work for. I'm very aware that not all women are as fortunate as I am. And so I would just make give the advice that you have to put the investment in yourself to put the work in. I was lucky to have a very solid athletic background prior, competitive athlete. And, some women might have to spend a little bit more time in the gym ahead of time to build that expected upper body strength that isn't always as natural to come for many. I will also add that, and this is just a boast for my department, the 30 by 30 initiative. We're very proud here at Newark Police Department. We've had 30%. We fluctuate up and down right around that 30% mark. And that wasn't because of focused recruitment towards women. I think it really has a lot to do with what I'm talking about, that equitable culture that was created there. And women who were applying saw that Newark Police Department, up until a month ago when we had a female police chief, had women representation at every rank of the department, from officer, sergeant, lieutenant, captain, and chief. We currently have all ranks except for police chief. But I'm just very, very fortunate, in a very fortunate position.
Well, that's great to hear. And as a follow-up to that, kind of a corollary, what advice would you give? Obviously, you're very fortunate to have an agency that is culturally based in that way. What advice would you give to women who want to pursue that same pathway of being on a tactical team? Or we're going to talk a little bit about use of force and things like that. What advice would you offer?
This is the advice that I wouldn't just offer women. I would offer this to anybody that's seeking an appointment to a tactical team. You have to have a team mentality. You have to be willing to put in the work and step up for your teammates. But more so, you have to have a little bit of a thick skin. And a big part of tactical trainings and operations is your after action or hot wash, whatever you want to call it, your debrief. And if you can't handle constructive criticism, and sometimes it's not relayed so gently, you have to be able to listen, absorb it, and be able to act upon it the next time around. Because if you continue to make those mistakes, your teammates see it. And that goes for everybody. That's not just women. But you definitely have to have a little bit of a thick skin to be part of that type of team.
Yeah, for sure. And I always know after in my second agency I led, we had a certified SWAT team, and they were one of only a very, very small percentage in the entire state that had achieved that standard. And again, they were 2 days of training per month and national trainings and very, very squared away. And I might stop and see the team briefly after a serious operation, but then I left it to themselves to do their debrief so that I was gone and they could be honest with each other and they could have those critical conversations. Because like you said, without them, you'll never get past, you'll never evolve to the degree that you need to.
That's right. That's right. You have to have the ability to self-reflect and improve, because you never know when you're going to come face to face with another circumstance where you need to be able to, oftentimes you have to admit your faults and be able to admit to not just yourself, but to your teammates that you messed something up. And that also goes for the team leaders and the commanders, not just the operators. That goes all the way up and down. And that's how you build trust on your team.
And here's a perfect segue. So every operation has an ops plan, and you look at contingencies, you look at, different variables that can go wrong, and you put the odds in your favor that they go as correctly as possible. Likely you have a SWOT matrix, you see where the threshold is, where the threat is. But even with that, you don't always have perfection. It's just the nature of it. Can you just talk about an operation that didn't go right and how you managed it afterwards or during it?
Well, the operation that comes to mind was not a pre-planned operation. So there wasn't a comprehensive SWOT matrix. There wasn't a full-on operation plan, which, as you know, when there is a pre-planned event, there is a ton of work, weeks potentially worth of work that goes into surveillance and floor planning and team building, and usually for team our size, it requires multi-jurisdictional teams to come together to execute an operation. This was an in the moment response to 2 officers in an adjacent city being shot at. They were shot, and our team was the first team to land on the residence where we thought the responsible was inside. And I mentioned earlier, when I became sergeant, I was one of 2 team leaders, and the other team leader, who was more experienced and senior to me, was out of town, and this was my first operation on my own as team leader. And as I respond, and I'll just backtrack a little bit, as I responded to this agency, this city next door, where I happened to also live, and I had one of my sisters works for that city. So when I heard an officer was shot, and I didn't know who was shot, my initial response was very emotional, and I had to put it together, get it together a little bit before I was able to connect and confirm that it wasn't her. So as we got on scene, this was a circumstance that was drawn out for many, many hours. We were able to determine that the suspect was inside. There was, probably at least 5 other agencies that responded. We work very closely with the agencies surrounding us, like I mentioned. And after hours of attempted negotiations, there was a time where the suspect claimed that there was possibly a hostage inside. And we were able to determine that that was most likely not the case, and that it was a bluff. there was we attempted to do to insert hot gas into the residence to potentially extract, and unfortunately the house caught fire, and fire was on scene. Tampering down the fire that was in the front of the house, but the suspect was on the phone and was claiming that he was trying to get out. And my tactical commander at the time, or it was a group of commanders that were in the command post, requested that we do what's referred to as a limited penetration into the back of the house to attempt to extract this person. And so we did so, and was able to see that the house started. It was a layer of water at the bottom of the floor that we were trudging through, and then immediately exfilled when we realized that the suspect most likely had barricaded into a bathroom, and we were able to see very clearly that the fire was reaching toward the area where we were. And so, the question is, did it not go quite the way that you wanted? Absolutely not. We didn't intend for, a fire of that magnitude to start, and that really had to do with some of the training of hot gas that we have done a better job moving forward to ensuring that those types of things don't occur. And then additionally, just me as a new team leader, in hindsight, not putting the kibosh on the entry. I really, in hindsight, would have preferred that we'd done measures of pulling the walls down of the residence, instead of putting my team into that position, not just in close proximity of the fire, but to this suspect still armed, who had just shot at 2 officers, very clearly motivated to shoot at officers. And so, in hindsight, massive learning lesson, and I took ownership of that. What I still think as a big error on my part to lead that team into that entry.
Yeah, and that's a really key word, that ownership. And obviously, I'm sure, familiar with Jocko Willink and extreme ownership. And really, from a leadership point of view, it's really one of the main components of a good leader is to do that and self-reflect. And again, these things happen, but to know that now the training's evolved, you do things differently. That's really what it's about, because there are so many variables, and it's not like Hollywood where everything goes as scripted, because you're doing things on the fly. What I wanted to ask you as a follow-up is, obviously, use of force now more than ever, there's just such scrutiny. And if everything goes right, well, you exist under the radar and you succeeded in your mission and operation. But anything goes wrong, which it tends to, there's answering and accountability. And how do you manage how do you do risk management to the degree you need when it involves use of force at the level of tactical operations?
So honestly, whether it's a tactical operation or a patrol operation, to me, it's very similar risk management thought processes. It really just comes down to assessing priority of life. And if you keep that in mind as you're handling, whether it's a patrol call with a person with mental illness or a hostage situation, as long as you're keeping that priority of life in your forethoughts, it's going to help you navigate. And so, just for the audience who might not know what the priority of life is, essentially, your first priority of life is your hostages or your victims. After that, you have to take into consideration potential innocent bystanders that might be affected by whatever decision you're making. The third, you have to think about your officers and your first responders before your suspect. And that's where on my operation, the suspect was coming a little bit above, not a little bit. We put the suspect above our the officers and first responders. And that was my flaw.
And when you look at training, obviously we talk a lot about the physical components of training for tactics. There's a lot of weight you carry. There's a lot of fatigue you have to be able to endure. There's a lot of fine motor skills and gross motor skills. But there also has to be a huge mental component, because when you look at use of forces that have gone wrong, a lot of times it's people who have a lack of training. They resort to primal instincts. They lose track of their emotional control. So I would imagine, and please, I'd love to hear your thoughts. You are doing a lot of training that reinforces that the tactics are not emotionally driven, but situationally driven, and that the people that are on those teams, whether as a patrol capacity or as a TAC team capacity, very proficient, so that the force is commensurate with what's needed.
Oh, 100%, Dennis. I was also very fortunate here in Alameda County. We had an event that began in 2007, a training, and it started as just tactical SWAT competition and training, but then it morphed into much more realistic, where you need to incorporate fire, search and rescue, and EMS into the training exercise. So from 2007, and this training went until about just right before the pandemic, was exactly what you're talking about. So we have a ton of staff still here who have experienced this. This is, I can't speak higher of how just critical this type of training is. So essentially, it was 48 hours of nonstop training where you went from scenario to scenario, and building these skills. But also it induced fatigue. Like whether you got a little bit of sleep in between or not, you still had to be on your game and be able to make decisions with that in the stress induced fatigue built into the nature of the exercise. And then you're immediately given feedback, by proctors, and like I mentioned earlier about needing that thick skin, being able to recover. Maybe you flubbed on one and then you did great on another. So lots of highs, lots of lows, and then physical challenges in between, obstacle courses and long distance rucks, that type of thing. So thankfully, we've had that was very foundational in establishing a lot of our core use of force principles, and that went not just for our TAC team. A lot of our instructors that have been a part of the TAC team are part of our use of force training team for the entire department. So they incorporated a lot of those principles into all use of force training, scenario-based training. It's absolutely needed. We also ensure that all of our scenario-based training includes an element of de-escalation, where we also added a component for all staff sorry, my radio's on, I just realized. Added a component of an additional use of force training called Artemis, and that's put on by a woman named Jolie Warniak, I think she's based out of Arizona. And what that does is it really creates team tactics for each patrol team. They train together. Each patrol team trains together, and it's all about pre-escalation, what they can do beforehand to lower the potential factors that could catalyze a situation. And then everything is very controlled and all about communication with each other to ensure that things are handled at the lowest level. So it's all about just ensuring that, those training principles of inducing stress, good communication with team, factoring in de-escalation and just working together to come out with the the ideal outcome.
Yeah, and there's no way to get around it. Scenario-based training, RBT, reality-based training, that has to be a staple in every organization, because if the first time an officer or a CAT team is experiencing those emotions or that adrenal surge or whatever is when they're actually at the scene of an event, then it's too late. They have to do it beforehand, and what you're describing is exactly that.
That's right.
So, as we're winding down, Captain, I think this is just such an important topic that we're discovering, because the way a tactical situation unfolds and is settled, it really depends a lot on the leadership, the training, the mindsets going in, and you're doing all of the right things, which is a great message to all the listeners and viewers. I want to ask you if you can just share from a leadership perspective, because everything boils down to quality leadership to have quality results. Is there a favorite book that you'd recommend, or podcast, and or leadership philosophy that you subscribe to?
I really enjoy listening to Cleared Hot podcast. It's a Navy SEAL. His name is Andy Stumpf. He has some great guests and some great tidbits. I happened to work with him previously. I was a trainer for CrossFit headquarters, and he had gone through quite a bit of real life combat in Afghanistan. He suffered I forget what type of round in his hip, and his recovery. But he has been on a guest on Joe Rogan and Jocko Willink and all of this. And of course, I'm a fan of Jocko, and that type of his extreme ownership principles are completely valuable and applicable for whether it's police, military, or just living your life. But just good. The way it comes across very colloquial, it's not trying to give you something kind of philosophical and that's not tangible. It's very, relatable and easy to swallow and understand. But honestly, I don't spend a lot of time listening or reading a lot of leadership books. I personally like to diversify and listen to different political type information and on all ends of the spectrum. Because I want to be, as a leader, I want to be informed about like all types of opinions, so I can relate to different walks of life and have a firm understanding of where everyone is coming from. As a police organization, we need to be very apolitical, yet we need to have a firm understanding of what everybody's potential agenda is, and then the other types of media that I like to consume is something that's just very I like fiction and mysteries and something that's just completely separated and segued away from this entirely, because I am a firm believer in wellness and creating balance in my life. Because if I was completely just consumed with work leadership, I could see myself getting a little bit too spun up and focused and not be able to relax. So having that balance, and in addition, ensuring that I spend time and having hobbies outside and friends in a community that aren't just law enforcement and whatnot, is really, I believe, helped me sustain longevity in this career and ensuring balance.
Yeah, what a positive way to end this, because we could do a podcast just on the wellness component, and you're right. You have to infuse it when you're doing something as important and as high stress, potentially, as tactical operations at the SWAT level and even patrol level. You have to have things that you can go home, disconnect, have hobbies and interests outside of that. And I really like that you present that to the listeners and viewers, that having that type of reading material in your repertoire has a tremendous amount of value.
Absolutely. Thank you for having me, Dennis. Appreciate it.
Absolutely. Thank you for being here. Maddie's going to come and close us out. Again, I can guarantee this podcast will have a lot of positive feedback from it. So thank you for your time and expertise.
Thank you.
Thank you for taking the time to meet the law enforcement heroes and leaders who are part of the MS Lepsel family. You can find more episodes of Blue Leadership on Facebook and YouTube. If you would like to learn more about the Lepsel program, visit us at criminaljustice.sandiego.edu.